I have a question for you. Do you think reparations should be paid? I'd like to offer these videos as a way to reason why someone would consider reparations as a way of reparative justice. The first thing you might notice is that those enslaved were enslaved longer than they have been free. The second thing is what oppression has looked like throughout American history for the enslaved. What started as chains and violence has morphed throughout the years into multiple forms of control that, aside from the violence, is almost hidden. This oppression can only be viewed over time and its effect on those targeted, which is the descendants of enslaved Americans. This is then allowed to spread to other minority populations as well. That is why, if it is repaired for the targeted group, it will aid all the others that are affected by this oppression. The tools of oppression in America have evolved over time, often shifting from overt physical violence to more insidious and systemic forms. Here's an outline of how oppression has transitioned from chains and violence to laws and codes, and then into societal structures. Slavery. The first and most visible tool of oppression was the system of slavery. Enslaved people, primarily African Americans, were physically bound by chains, separated from families, and subjected to brutal violence. This was a direct and unrelenting form of control. Violence and intimidation enslaved people, and later African Americans during the Jim Crow era, were often subjected to violence, lynching, and intimidation, both by individuals, white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, and by state-sponsored entities like police forces and militias. Dispossession and forced labor. Even after slavery ended, black people in the South were subject to convict leasing, sharecropping, and other forms of forced labor that closely resembled slavery. Black codes and Jim Crow laws. After the Civil War, during Reconstruction, Southern states enacted black codes designed to limit the rights and freedom of African Americans. The Jim Crow laws later institutionalized racial segregation and disenfranchisement. Voting restrictions, laws like literacy tests, poll taxes, and grandfather clauses were used to disenfranchise African Americans, especially in the South, preventing them from exercising their right to vote. Segregation laws enforcing racial segregation in schools, transportation, and public accommodations reinforced racial inequality. These laws persisted in the South well into the mid-20th century. Redlining. In the 1930s, the federal government sanctioned redlining policies that prevented African Americans from buying homes in certain neighborhoods and denied them access to home loans. This practice had long-lasting effects on wealth accumulation for black families. Criminal justice system laws targeting African Americans, like the disproportionate policing of black neighborhoods and the mass incarceration of black men, perpetuated systemic oppression. The war on drugs, initiated in the 1980s, disproportionately affected black and brown communities through harsh sentencing laws. Racial stereotypes and bias. Over time, racism became ingrained in cultural norms, leading to stereotypes about African Americans as inferior, dangerous, or unworthy. These stereotypes shaped media portrayals, societal expectations, and personal biases, affecting everything from job opportunities to policing. Economic inequality. Structural racism has resulted in significant wealth disparities between black and white Americans, with black families having significantly lower average wealth, partly due to historical exclusion from wealth-building opportunities like homeownership and education. Educational disparities. Public schools in black neighborhoods are often underfunded compared to those in predominantly white areas. This leads to fewer opportunities for educational advancement, which contributes to long-term social and economic inequality. Healthcare disparities. African Americans face significant disparities in healthcare access and outcomes, including higher rates of chronic diseases, lower life expectancy, and poor treatment by medical professionals due to racial biases. Cultural erasure and marginalization. African American history and culture were often either misrepresented or omitted from mainstream education, contributing to a sense of disconnection and marginalization. The lack of representation in media and politics continues to reinforce the notion that black lives are secondary. Employment discrimination. Despite legal protections, employment discrimination remains pervasive, whether through biased hiring practices, wage gaps, or the school-to-prison pipeline that disproportionately funnels black youth into the criminal justice system, limiting future career prospects. These layers of oppression are interconnected, with each form building on or reinforcing the others. The legacy of chains and violence has been institutionalized through laws and codes, and today, these tools are baked into the fabric of American society, manifesting in the forms of economic inequality, biased legal systems, and cultural perceptions that continue to marginalize African Americans. This video is geared towards explaining why there should be reparations. What are the facts and reasons behind reparative justice? Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for part 2.